Hi, everybody. Ken Krogue here. We are so excited to have another webinar. Chuck and I did a webinar on gamification back in 2012, and this one is called the 12 Gamification Principles to Increase Productivity and Engagement. I'm Ken Krogue, the founder and president of InsideSales.com. And I have with me best-selling author Chuck Coonradt, the author of The Game of War. Thanks for coming in today, Chuck.
Oh, Ken, you're welcome. I'm just happy to be here, especially since you've done such a fine job of interrupting my retirement with your Forbes article.
Yeah, you got a little bit upset at me, didn't you? Chuck said we wrote an article about Chuck called The 5 Gamification Rules from the Grandfather of Gamification. Now, he was a best-selling author in the world of gamification before gamification was cool. Now, there's two kinds of gamification in a sense, and they've sort of merged together in our world. The first is the athletics model, and the second is the model of video game mechanics, and those have come together. So I wrote an article on Forbes back in 2012, and the thing sort of went crazy. We had Chuck speak a couple of times. Two of the books that I gave Dave Elkington, my business partner, clear back when we started InsideSales.com, one was The Game of Work, and the other one was Magnificent Obsession by Lloyd C. Douglas. And right from the very beginning, we have tried to follow Chuck and what he's done in the world of business productivity. And he's been at it for 40 years. He has come out of retirement to do it again. And I want to hear the principles of gamification. So the agenda today is Chuck's going to go through 5 of his key principles and some of the things that really put his model on the map. And then I'm going to follow up about the last 30 minutes and walk you through 7 principles that we've learned. And then we're going to take the last 10 minutes for some question and answer and see if we can really help tie it up and put on a bow. We've got lots of great downloads today. You'll see 5 different things you can download over there in the sidebar. And Chuck and I are going to put together a second ebook from this. So I'm going to turn you loose, Chuck, but I'm going to take notes here.
You're a gentleman and a scholar. It's amazing that it's really been 40 years since we started this whole process, and interesting enough to come into the I don't know. I feel like I was country before country was cool. It's the only song that keeps running through my head. But I'd like to take us to what John Wooden said about what we need to do to progress. Coach Wooden, one of the great Americans, the great coaches, and the great leaders of our country. It's what we learn after we think we know it all, it really counts. And so I'd like to share today not just the principles that we put together back in 1984 in the book, but really to emphasize maybe some of the watch-outs, the look-fors, the caveats, if we can use a fancy word, around them. And we know that feedback is the most important element that's in the game of work, and the way we handle feedback contributes to whether or not we get engagement and we get energy. We talked about last time that the denial or withholding of feedback is the most severe form of psychological punishment we can inflict on someone. But I want to talk a little bit about 2 things that in your gamification application in your business need to happen. And the first one is that the appropriate amount of feedback can only be determined by the recipient and never the giver. Now, if you've ever tried to put a 3-year-old to bed before they were ready to go, you've understood this principle at a core level. You lay them down, they pop up. You lay them down again, they pop up. Dad, I need a drink. Dad, I need to go. Dad, I need to this. Dad, I need to that. Until you give them enough hugs and kisses that they get their strokes, if you will, they get their bucket filled, and then they can walk away and they can go to sleep. When you start to look inside gamification in your organization, you have to be sensitive to the kinds of feedback and the amount of feedback that each one of those participants needs. Now, this means you got to listen a little bit more maybe than we've done in the past. Second caveat about feedback is that you must have the feedback from the coach be consistent with the feedback that's coming off the system scoreboard. So if you've got a leaderboard, you've got badges going on, you've got a number of the other mechanics in place, it's imperative that the coach is still doing the same kinds of conversation that is coming off of that scoreboard. Coaches have to avoid going and picking out the negatives, even though there are fewer of them, and making a big deal out of the bad stuff. Instead, they want to make a big deal out of the good stuff they want more of. We are told from the very beginning of behavioralism to reinforce the behaviors we want repeated. Let me just insert here for a moment. The reason that we're taking this approach today is that when something isn't working as well as it could in your gamification or mine, it's usually because we're not applying the principles correctly, or we're not applying correct principles. I love to sail, and when a sailboat is not taking full advantage of the wind, it's usually because we've not set the sail correctly to maximize the principle that air moves around the sail faster than it moves across the flat side, which creates a vacuum and a drag. A plane can stall out with tragic circumstances if the flaps or other adjustments compromise the lifting principles of the wings. And so it is with gamification. For each of the principles, there's a caveat to ensure proper application for maximum results. Let's go to principle number 2, that of scorekeeping. And our caveat on scorekeeping is, again, very simple, very straightforward, and that is that you must first maximize the number of winners. So to make that happen in your gamification, look for sub-games inside the big game. You might break them up into flights as we would in a corporate golf tournament, so that you're based on people's experience might be one category, or product lines might be linked together. And recognize that most progress is made from the from the application of small growth and small techniques, and looking for, let me put it this another way, looking for the opportunity that your people have to ask for sub-games inside the big game will make a big difference in how you go about this. Our second caveat around scorekeeping is very simply around competition. Very often we misunderstand what competition is. And we like, in our principle, to allow competition but not force it. When I choose to compete, I'm pumped, I'm engaged. When forced to compete, I disengage and seek justification for not winning. Boy, those are big words. I'm going to have to make that a little simpler and straightforward. If you've ever been in a racquetball ladder or a tennis ladder at your club, you pick somebody just a little bit better than you are to go out and have an opportunity to compete against. Nobody wants to go arm wrestle the strongest individual in the school. So make sure that the competition that comes out of your gamification is allowed people to set up their own games, throwdowns and challenges. Make sure that you're maximizing those, but keep them within this element of letting the participants pick the people with whom they're going to compete. Let's talk about goal setting. We know that the principle is that in recreation, the goals are more clearly defined than they are at work. Now, gamification systems and the mechanics have done a good job of clarifying the goals. But let's look at two things that we must keep in mind if we want to have maximum engagement. We all know about SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, with time sensitivity are great, and they ought to be part of everything that we do. But I would suggest to you that as you look at getting engagement with your people, that the most important part of your SMART goals application is the attainable and realistic. People want to be able to have an opportunity to win, and they want to have an opportunity to be part of the next big thing that happens. There's plenty of time for the BHAGs, the big, hairy, audacious goals that we all want to achieve. But keep in mind that there are millions of blocks in the pyramids in Egypt, and each one was put in place a few feet at a time. So focus on the attainability and the realistic nature of your goals, and you'll be far better off. This is my favorite. When you start looking at goal setting is great, goal getting is wonderful, but celebrating them is the biggest part of all. Celebrate, celebrate, celebrate. There may be some on the call old enough to remember a song like that from Three Dog Night. It's our theme song at the Game of Work. Make sure that the bigger the crowd that you celebrate in front of, the bigger the thrill for the person being recognized. As we go into consistent coaching, or as we say in the original book, don't change the rules in the middle of the game, we have to recognize that there are a couple of things that make coaching work best. First, that consistency is the most important attribute in a coach. It doesn't matter if you are teacher or tyrant. Consistency is the most desirable aspect on the part of a team. Some of the most famous coaches in athletics have not been the softest or the kindest, but you can always count on who they were, and make sure that your coaches are consistent in the message that they're delivering. Tie this back to that the message that comes off of the scoreboard needs to be consistent with the message that's being delivered by the coach. And this is probably the toughest thing for us to recognize as leaders, that the way people feel about their coach dictates how they feel about their company. Now, you can be in an organization with the greatest benefits in the world. In fact, one of the things that I think is so unusual about the way we approach compensating people is that almost every reasonable-sized company in America has fringe benefits. Most of the time, they're 30 to 35% of the base cost of compensation. And we pay them, and people sell them to us. And here's the thing that's scary. You have to be off the job to enjoy your fringe package. You're either sick, you're on vacation, you're retired, you're on maternity leave. But you have to be gone in order to understand the benefits of fringe. Now, we know that people leave companies. If you look at all the great research that Gallup people have done, we know that people don't leave companies, they leave coaches. And the way people feel about their coach dictates how they feel about their company. And yet you will be very hard-pressed to find an organization that is high-minded enough, not high-minded, that is intelligent enough to be spending 0.5% of total compensation on leadership development. Gamification is critical. The mechanics work. They help us get this job done. But they will never replace the one-on-one personal relationship I have with the person that I report to. That's what makes coaching so critical. And the last, but I believe perhaps the most important as it relates to engagement, is that there's a higher degree of personal choice and recreation than there is in work. This first caveat represents the fact that buy-in comes from giving people choice in their methods and in the way they get things done. So I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to imagine that you are being asked to do something. It's a new task. Maybe it's being asked by a new manager. When you look at all of that, which one of these questions, the why, the what, or the how, do you want to be told the least. Now, while you're thinking about that, let me give you my opinion. I hate to be told how. The reason I hate to be told how is it takes away my choice. It takes away my creativity. And it also says that if you think you have to tell me how, you are saying that I'm not bright enough to figure it out on my own in really big illuminated letters. Now, I'll accept the what because that's necessary. But what I really love is the why. And so our learning is this, that to important people, we insist on explaining why. If you've ever had to convince a neighbor to share the cost of a fence, or you were talking about borrowing money, you know that your insistence on explaining why sometimes will go way beyond them being sold. My good friend Simon Sinek built a whole career around first tell them why. Secondly, to unimportant people, we simply tell how. And most important about this is they can tell how we feel about them by the way we talk to them. So getting buy-in from organizations and getting buy-in in your organization comes from allowing your people to pick their methods. You don't have to worry about the goals. People in organizations seem to acknowledge the importance of leadership and investors setting the overarching goals. It is the allowance on setting and choosing my own personal methods which give me choice and therefore allow me to buy into the overall process, getting it done. Make sure that's a part of your gamification process as you put it in. Now, we put together, there's a download. You can participate while we're on the webinar of our gamification readiness survey. And if we get some time and we get all the participation we'd like, we'll review some of the questions that will come out of that when we get a chance to wrap it up. Beyond that, I'll just end with my favorite tongue twister, and that is the whole cornerstone behind the game of work and gamification is that people will pay for the privilege of working harder than they will work when they are paid. And if you doubt that, all you need to do is look around at all the recreational activities that take place in your life. Ken, it's coming right back to you, buddy.
Thank you, Chuck. That was awesome. I've got about 2 pages of notes again already. And I want to really recommend to our audience that you look closely at those principles. As I mentioned, when we started InsideSales.com, we talked about 2 main books. One was The Game of Work. The other one was Magnificent Obsession. And The Game of Work has been a core model that we've used back from the beginning. And if you get a chance, maybe go check out the Forbes article. This is Chuck's book. As he mentioned, he's got a PDF download of one of his other books on scorekeeping, which is critical. And I want to go ahead and jump in. I circled back a little bit to a slide that I wanted to share with you. Let me see if I can push you the next one here. Okay, here we go. This is from Scott Santucci of Forrester. When you focus on the science of sales, you achieve breakthrough performance. And again, that's sort of our mantra here at InsideSales.com, the science of selling. And we believe, though, that you have to start with art. You start with the masters. And Chuck is a master. Start with the principles and then tweak it with science. Iterate and test and improve. It's better to start with art than to start from scratch. So the next principle is the definition. This is from Gartner. Now this is the most recent version of gamification. This is one based on video mechanics, game mechanics. What is gamification? The use of game mechanics and experience designed to digitally engage and motivate people to achieve their goals. Now, we believe in blending the two together. And why is that so important? Why should we gamify? Well, I'll tell you why. It's these Gen Ys, it's these millennials. They grew up playing World of Warcraft. They can text message with their thumb on one hand in their pocket. My son can do that. I watched him. It's crazy. And I hate to tell you this, everybody, but there are now more millennials in this world than there are baby boomers. And we thought that was the big generation that would change everything, and it did. But there are 74.9 million baby boomers, 73.5 million millennials, and they have more impact now than the baby boomers. And so let's talk about the power of gamification, the market behind it. Let's start first with just the world of video games. Actually, before I do, I want to talk about athletics for just a second longer. So when I was at Franklin Covey, we started the inside sales department there. In fact, it was not called Franklin Covey yet. It was still Franklin Quest. And we were the second fastest growing company in the United States back in the early 90s, the #1 training company in the world. And I had interviewed hundreds and hundreds of salespeople for my inside sales teams. And after a while, we started asking, what are the key ingredients that make up our high performers? And so we looked at all their resumes, we put them all together, we matched it with our top performers. It wasn't nearly as sophisticated as what we do today with our machine learning PhDs and everything, but I still remember the 4 factors that were most statistically significant with our high performers. Now, remember, we're here in we were out in West Valley City, Utah, right by Salt Lake City at the time. And the #1 factor for alignment with a high-performance salesperson was a background in competitive athletics. That was it, competitive athletics. In fact, we have in our sales force today, we have bodybuilders, we have mixed martial arts professionals, we have a chess champion or two. So competitive is probably the key word, but most of that happens with collegiate athletes, with really strong all-state high school athletes. We've got some professional athletes on the floor. And everywhere I go, I see the same thing. So listen up to Mr. Coonradt here, because the athletics model is critical. We have to understand it. But let's fold in the video game model. How powerful is it today? Well, the #1 movie in Hollywood was Avatar at $760 million. But the video game industry is $1 billion a day. It's crazy. Who plays video games? 58% of Americans, that's who. The average age is age 30, slightly more men than women. 55% of the audience is male. But you can see there's a pretty even distribution between under 18, 18 to 35, and over 35. But here's what blew my mind. We did some research on probably the biggest franchise out there, the world of Warcraft. And they got started back in 2004. And since that time, in fact, this research is actually still a couple years old. It's probably bigger than this by another. There have been 6 million years of consecutive video game play just in World of Warcraft. Oh my gosh, I broke that into work weeks. That's 312 million work weeks. That's 12.5 billion hours of work. Now, I researched the average wage in the United States, and it's $25 an hour, $24.99. Guys, that's $311 trillion in wages. Holy crap. That is nuts. I hope I got that right. No, I think that's $1 billion. Check that for me, Ryan. We're checking right now. But think about that. Our national debt is knocking on the door of $18 trillion. One video game, a lot of fun, folks, but there's a lot of time being focused on video gaming, and people have gotten really good at it. Now, it's come a long way. It's come a long way. I remember Pong. Does anybody remember Pong back in 1972? Back then, video games were purely based on if you're better than the other person. But nowadays, there's a lot more than just competence. It's not about just skill. It's also about autonomy and relatedness, relationships built with people you play video games with. We just saw out on the news, it's now become a spectator sport. Really? People watch other people play video games. I don't get it. But it's massive. Twitch was just purchased or being purchased by Amazon. We thought Google was going to snap them up. something big's happening there, and that's a streaming video game watching network that lets you watch other people play video games. Wow. So why should we care about gamification? What's the big deal? Well, Gallup has given us some pretty amazing statistics in the world of employee productivity. And they believe, their research shows, and by the way, they researched 17 million employees over the course of 30 years and found that the single concept that was most related to productivity was engagement. And those 5 rules that Chuck just stated are really about engagement, about getting employees engaged. And that same research that Gallup did shows that 24% of employees are actively disengaged at work, meaning they're purposely not engaged. 63% are randomly not engaged. They're just not focused, and only 13% of employees are engaged, meaning they're heads down, focused, enjoy the work, love what they're doing. And then the really interesting things that came out of the rules of engagement was 12 key questions. They found, what is it that gets employees engaged? Now, this is my friend Paul Allen. I'm going to be doing a webinar with him shortly. He is the evangelist for Gallup over the StrengthsFinder product. Many of you have probably taken the StrengthsFinder 2.0 test. I think 11 million people have. But prior to that, the 12 elements of great management, or in other words, how to get engagement in your employees, came down to these 12 principles. Now think about it. Wouldn't it be cool if we could design our gamification models to help drive this engagement? And much of what Chuck's already talked about is right here. Number 1, I know what's expected of me. 2, I have materials and equipment I need to do my job right. 3, at work I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. 4, this one's very closely tied to gamification. In the last 7 days, that's within a week, I have received recognition or praise for doing good work. Number 5, now this is interesting. Do you cater your gamification to the needs of your people? My supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. 6, there's someone at work who encourages my development. 7, at work, my opinions seem to count. Now, do you remember what Chuck said? He said, let people choose the forms of gamification and reinforcement that they work under. 8, the mission or purpose of my company makes me feel my job is important. 9, my associates or fellow employees are committed to doing quality work. Gamification really helps drive that because the people can see what each other's doing, and if they see everybody working hard, they work hard. 10, I have a best friend at work. Now, it's a lot of fun to throw down and challenge your friend and see how well they're going to do. 11, in the last 6 months, someone at work has talked to me about my progress. Well, if you're measuring the stats and you're watching what's going on, that's going to happen a lot more than just 12 every 6 months. And 12, this last year, I've had opportunities at work to learn and to grow. Take special note of that, folks. Those are the 12 key ingredients to employee engagement. So let's talk about engagement in game mechanics. Now, as we talked about, there's 3 main ingredients. There's competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Now, competence just shows how good you're doing, either collectively or individually, and you can earn points in sort of a token economy. The leaderboards are probably the top. They should be at the top there on competence. Autonomy is the ability to show yourself as an individual and work individually, and then compete with other individuals. Relatedness is that relationship piece, and that one's bigger than we had any idea. So let's get into some of the individual elements of gamification, things I'd like to really recommend. Number 1 is, now this is one of the core ingredients of the inside sales space, is a focus on leading indicators. This is getting first downs, you guys. Now, I used that example over in Rome when I was speaking for Cisco, and only about 20% of the audience was from America, and I got a lot of blank stares when I talked about American football, so I apologize. I'm an old football coach, and so I'm speaking today. I'm going to use football. And a first down is an incremental mark of success that shows you're making progress towards winning the game. And that's where we found gamification really helps significantly. Now, we found that it's not quite as important around things that they're intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated to accomplish anyway. So if they're being commissioned appropriately, then the focus on making sales and driving revenue is already there. But some of the nuances of the sales process, especially in the world of leading indicators are things like making more calls, generating more referrals, setting appointments, making sure your appointments hold, all the different stages of the sales process that lead to the sale. That's where gamification really shines. And the hero of gamification processes is Leaderboards. That's the one that just leaps off the page. I learned this back at Franklin. Chuck already talked about it. I learned that, in fact, my old boss, Jeff Hall, he gave me this great book called Putting the 1-Minute Manager to Work, written by Ken Blanchard, one of the leading speakers and presenters that we promoted at Franklin. And it basically says, post the results on the wall. And you know what? As soon as we would do that, the results would go up 20%. As soon as we posted the effort would go up 20%. And we're finding that it's actually closer to 38%. Our Power Standings research, which is our internal gamification platform, shows that on average it's a 38% leap in immediate increase in these effort and results that are being measured. So big deal. The second big question is, what kind of gamification model do you use? Now, there's two big approaches. There's contests and promotions. And what happens usually is the CEO loves to see contests, but the HR and talent acceleration team and the coaches want to see promotions. Why? Well, the big gladiator in the team tends to win the contests, and very few others do. But what happens is everybody who's in the middle of the pack don't get nearly as... So his definition of a contest is a winner out of a whole group. Definition of a promotion is when everybody can win because they're really competing with themselves or they're competing with other teams. So promotions tend to get a lot more people in the mix. So there is definitely some pros and cons of contests and promotions. With contests, you have one big winner, much bigger prizes, competition with others, and that's usually forced competition. Chuck was talking about that, and that's not always the best approach. Sometimes it's really powerful. There's some great examples where contests are awesome. President's Club is a good one. But promotions, anyone can win. Smaller prizes, you compete with self. You move the needle with everybody in the team with promotions if they're designed right. Now let's talk about what really motivates people, because that is a science in and of itself. Probably the watermark of research done on that was Harvard Business Review, the Herzberg study. If you haven't had a chance to research this, go out there and do so, because it's really, really big. The basic thesis was, what motivates people? What affects their job attitudes? And what they found is there was two kinds of approaches. There were things that make people, that lead to job satisfaction, and then there were things that contribute to job dissatisfaction. And the big question, of course, is salary and income. So look down there right in the middle of the brownish graph. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 up from the bottom is salary. And what that means is lack of sufficient salary is a demotivator, but extra salary is not the primary motivator. Now, our big meat-eating, high-end enterprise salespeople would say differently because they make a lot of money, right? And that's how it works. But quite often, big income is a matter of keeping score. Look at the top job satisfaction contributors. Number one was achievement. Number 2 was recognition of that achievement. 3 was the inherent work itself. 4 was the responsibility that comes with that work. And 5 was advancement. 6 was growth. Every one of those pretty much is listed in those 12 engagement questions from Gallup, you guys. The research is there. It's powerful. So what we try and do, and what we really recommend you do in your sales teams, is you find the individual areas of strength within each salesperson. We call it their superpower. That came from our new head of the Momentum Department, Dave Boyce. It's a really cool idea. So we look for people's superpowers, and we try and help them play to their strengths. A couple of examples. My friend Troy Fullmer, he's probably one of the most persistent people we've got that I've ever met. This is his uncle, Gene Fullmer, the world champ boxer. And Troy is really good at one thing. He's pleasantly persistent. He just never gives up. We've had a rep work for us, Lindsey, and she was really, really good at making sure that the information transitioned to the salespeople. That was her superpower. When she set an appointment, she went and downloaded everything about that appointment so that it was perfect, and the salesperson knew exactly what to do. Jordan Timothy, he is really good at getting back and reminding the customers to show up to the dang appointment. Like Thor throwing his hammer, he just knocks them on the head and reminds them. And that's his superpower. And he's one of the best. In fact, we have a different form of specialization here at our company, InsideSales.com. We've got about 16 different specialist positions. Most of them are at the front lines. But I was on a webinar just the other day with my friend Jim Keenan and Trish Bertuzzi, and we told them that we have a specialist position in our management team called a coach. Now, most companies have managers do the coaching, but we've broken that function out, and we have specialist coaches. And Jordan Timothy is now a coach. He got so good at doing what he does, he's one of our coaches. He's like a personal strength trainer for our sales teams. And that's what a superpower can do for you. Then one of our best is Gabe Larson, and he's really, really good at execution, technical execution. He just gets stuff done. That's his superpower. So I would ask you to take a minute and think about it. What is your superpower? What's your team's superpower? Can you work together as a team and play to the strengths? That's what a really great manager does. That was the whole point of the Gallup study, was playing to the superpowers of your people. All right. One of my favorite things, and this is a little counterintuitive, this is a little different than what you hear about out there, but I had a really good, probably the best boss I ever worked for. His name's Larry MacFarlane, and he had a really interesting approach to incentives. He would give them things they could never afford to buy on their own, things they would never buy. Now, I was just a young sales guy trying to figure out how to support a family, and I was trying to sell laptop computers for Toshiba, and they had an incentive program where you could earn points and then spend them on different things. And they had a pair of shoes from Johnston & Murphy that were $350. Now, I would never buy a pair of shoes for $350 back in those days. That just wouldn't happen. But those things were so motivating to me that I broke the record and went to town selling Toshiba laptops so I could get me a pair of those shoes. I made way more money than what I would have made, with what it was just for the shoes, just in commissions. I could have bought them. But you know what? Those shoes just really made an impact. So then, again, my best boss, he believed we all ought to have a little bit of culture and really see something cool. So he gave us tickets to Les Mis. And that was an experience that changed my life. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So there's all kinds of things you can do, but give them something that they wouldn't otherwise get. Give them an experience that they'll never forget, and you'll find that they get tied to you because you care. You care about helping them improve their world and change their lives. So the next big point I want to mention is it's similar to what Chuck was talking about with personal choice. And all the time, we as leaders we go pick incentives we think everybody's going to like. And you know what? Sometimes they don't. Quite often that they don't. We pick the things we like. I always tell the story of the golden rule. That's do unto others as you would have done unto you. Well, there's a better rule. It's the platinum rule, and that's do unto others as they would have done unto them, which means you better know them. And if you don't know them, just ask. So one of the funnest things we ever did was we researched what kinds of incentives people would really like. And I'm going to share that a little bit later in the presentation. But I was brought in by the Boy Scouts to help consult a little bit. And we had a scout camp that wasn't doing so well. None of the kids wanted to go there. And there was a bunch of old guys in a room trying to promote scout camp the coming year, and they were all talking about it. Said, well, we got more merit badges than ever. We got this cool new waterfront, and we've got this western fort that one of our donors donated, and it's so cool. They can play cowboys and Indians. And I sort of thought, I said, really? When's the last time you saw kids playing cowboys and Indians? Now, my father did, and my father-in-law did, and my mom did. But I don't recall anybody playing cowboy. John Wayne is not top of the charts anymore, although I love him. So I said, I'm going to ask you guys something a little bit crazy. Have you asked the boys, have you asked them what they like about that scout camp? And there was dead silence in that room. It's sort of like marketing 101, right? So I said, now let's do that. Let's just take a straw poll with kids who've gone to this scout camp and see what it was that they loved. And you know what? The number one ranked thing, without even a close second, was crawdads. Crayfish, you guys. It was after they went to those merit badge classes, they went and got a hot dog from the local lunchroom, tied it on a string, and went out in the lake, and they fished for crawdads. And then they cooked them and ate them like little lobsters. So from now on, when I say the phrase crawdads, you're going to know what I mean. You got to think like your people think. You got to ask them what they care about. One of our very best performers, he's sort of a legend in our teams, name's Duke. And we had this really cool incentive. Everybody thought it would be great. It was, I think, a $100 gift certificate to Cabela's. And you know what? That didn't even motivate Duke. He said he'd rather have a $50 gift certificate for Nike. And you know what? We got to be thinking and asking and finding out what really matters. So that's where I recommend you go, is you ask the people what they want. And so we do that quite often. We had a research study. You'll be able to download it here. And what we do is we stratify different options in different price ranges. Here's some examples. The most motivating item in the $50 range was 2 tickets to a college sporting event, followed by an iPod Shuffle or a round of golf. In the $250 range, the bottom right here, an Xbox 360. In the $1,000 range, top graph here, a MacBook Air. In the $5,000 range, all expense trip to London versus Hawaii, about the same cost, versus a 6-month lease on a Porsche. Okay, so I wouldn't have guessed that, but there you go. So when in doubt, ask. Give personal choice to your teams, and you'll really have some strong motivation. Now, one of our favorites, again, is President's Club. So we've even done some research on where people would want to go in President's Club, and that's something you can download as well. All right, so how powerful is gamification? Does it work out there in the real world? Well, this is Jeff Powell, DVP for ADP. And a pretty massive pilot study was done internally with 150 reps over the course of 28 weeks. One team had gamification going, one team did not. The folks with gamification, and notice the trend here with leading indicators. Dials went up 88%, talk time 80%, proposals sent 86%. Closed accounts, the number of closed accounts was up 32% in this 28-week pilot study done internally by ADP. Now, I want to really stress it was done purely with those 150 reps, but that's some pretty intense numbers that gamification can bring about. Now, we love gamification because it dramatically improves engagement and the use of the system, And when the system's used better, there's more data. And you know, we're all about the data. So our Neurolytics platform loves more data. So I wanted to just quickly re-summarize Chuck's 5 rules. Chuck, you still out there? Probably got him on mute. All right. Why don't you just take a minute, Chuck, and just go back through your 5 rules, and then I'll do the same on my 7, and then we'll take some questions. Does that sound like a plan?
All right. Sure. First off, clearly defined rules or clearly defined goals. People have to understand where they are. You can imagine just going to a golf course and not being able, for the first time, not being able to get a map. You just wind up swinging and walking and cursing. Better scorekeeping, and by that we mean a lot of what Ken and I have talked about today, but contemporaneous, tied into the people who matter the most, and letting them get a handle on that. More frequent feedback. It's really interesting that in most organizations without gamification, you get feedback once a year or when you screw up, whichever comes first. And we believe, and motivation of recreation proves that if your feedback is not contemporaneous to your effort, and if you go back and look again at the 12 elements of engagement from Gallup folks, this frequent feedback, we believe everybody every day needs to know whether they've won or lost, and more frequently if possible. Personal choice, we both talked a bunch about that. If you want buy-in to a program, you have to give choice to the people in the organization. And last but not least, consistent coaching. When you look at the Gallup engagement stuff and you look at why people, and they have the best information on why people leave, they don't leave the organization, they leave their coach. And so investing in bringing your coaches to be compatible and consistent with your gamification mechanics is critical to making anything work long term.
I love that, and thanks, Chuck. You know, in our own organization, our CEO, Dave Elkington, is one of the most consistent people I've ever met in the world. And what he does is he drives accountability to our management teams to assist that coaching be consistent. We have, for example, he looks at key numbers every day, aggregated numbers every week, and rarely, if ever fails. And so beyond just a consistent coaching at the management level, guys, is accountability for that consistency at the executive level. And my hat's off to Dave Elkington. He's one of the best in the world I've ever seen. And much of our success, I think, is tied to that willpower, that consistency. It makes a huge difference. So let's review the 7 things I've talked about. Number 1 is engagement. In fact, that was something both Chuck and I really hit hard. The science of engagement really is brought out of the research from Gallup, those 12 questions. Go ask yourself those 12 questions and see how well your organization is doing. Both inside sales and gamification really shine in the world of focusing on leading indicators, the things that are going to bring success while you still have time to bring it. You know, the old school model of selling says, let's go hit our numbers at the end of the month. Well, the last day of the month, it's too late to do much, you know. But if you're focusing on leading indicators at the first of the month, you can see where you're going to be, and you can guide that ship to success. Leaderboards, they're still, you know, the hero of gamification. They're the place to start. As I mentioned, when you post it and focus on it, everything goes up. Our most recent research is showing a 38% increase. It's big that you understand the difference between contests and promotions. Now, a contest is a challenge with one winner. A promotion is achievement that can drive individual winners. And it's really, really important that we understand the difference. I love giving new experiences to your team, things they would not normally do on their own, things that they like, my pair of shoes or an experience at a nice Broadway play. And then both Chuck and I really talked about personal choice, and in my role I call it ask them. Just find out through research and surveys and sitting down with your people what they'd really like to see. We've got an example here right now that you can download, the Optimal Sales Incentives Research Study. And then focus on the long term. In fact, I didn't develop that very well, but basically it's this. We're finding that gamification can decay if you do the same thing all the time. If you just focus on the month, you're going to have a real struggle. That's the reason that President's Clubs do so well. And there's also some research we've done on locations for President's Clubs you might want to download. But remember to focus on the long term as well, a year at a time or a quarter at a time. Because that, and there's some new things starting to come around. We call them leagues. And in fact, we're nicknaming them Leaderboards. And that's where teams pull together over extended periods of time instead of individual gamification. Now, the opposite of gamification, and it's also effective, it's just not a great, not a fun culture over time, it's called shamification. So you can use the carrot or the stick. Both are effective. The folks in the middle are the ones you want to get a lot of performance out of as well. The folks at the top, they're the meat eaters who are going to do good no matter what. And the ones at the bottom, well, they might not be best suited for sales anyway. So let's see what we can do to have some good things happen here. Okay, we're on the question and answer period of our presentation today. And I wanted to, there's one good question right off the top here, Chuck, I'm going to ask it of you. And that is, when is it best to give feedback? Is it best to do it immediately and quickly, or aggregate it and give it more, more detailed over time? What's your thoughts on best time to give feedback?
I like both. I think if you look at a professional golf tournament, you look at any of the sports that we pay money to see, you cannot delay the feedback. In our 2002 Winter Games that were here in Utah, we had a situation where the figure skating scores were 15 seconds too late. Normally it takes about 40 seconds for those scores to be aggregated. In one particular competition, it was delayed 15 seconds, and you could feel the trauma go through the group, waiting for scores when they expected them to be there. So you can't be too quick. But then you also need to aggregate it as it relates to the promotional aspects you talked about.
Gotcha. That's great. Next question. How do I determine what is the type of feedback my people want? That's your cup of tea as well, Chuck. How about taking a stab at that one? What type of feedback would your people want?
Two things to do. One is to observe what works and what doesn't. And secondly, as you pointed out so well, is ask them. Just absolutely ask them. Now, we know in a broad sense, research-wise, if you reinforce the behavior you want repeated, and you're making a big deal out of the good stuff that you want more of, if you can get to a point where you count days between accidents rather than the accident frequency rate, which is so standard, or you can count perfect shipments or perfect orders or the things that you really want to have more of and make a big deal out of it, that will help. But you have to ask your people, am I giving you the kind of feedback that you really want? Now, you'll have to take some smelling salts with you in most organizations because they will faint at the very question. But once you get them back conscious, it's a really good dialogue.
That's good. One of the most recent things that came about internally, and we really believe in sharing our internal best practices, was when in asking our teams what kind of measurement they'd want, instead of just, dials and contacts. That's not really, they wanted to know 2-minute calls, 2-minute conversations and greater. How many 2-minute conversations were being held? Meaning that's obviously long enough that this is a decent conversation starting to happen. It's beyond just a simple contact. And that came about as a result of asking our people. So I love what Chuck's saying. We did the same thing with our closers, our big enterprise closers. We sat down and we said, look, folks, what would be the perfect lead for you? And we came away with 20 different things. And in fact, they said, if you could give us a lead with all 20 of these factors, we would close 90% of them. Well, we listened, and we put that into a scoring mechanism that dramatically enhance what we do internally. And so that's just the best practice. Sit down and ask your people. Okay.
Ken, let me
go ahead.
let me offer one other thing, and we'll get it in the ebook. I don't have it on the tip of my tongue, but it's something that Drucker said. And Drucker said that in order for productivity to be advanced, you have to recognize that the person doing the job knows more about it than the person watching it. And I'll finalize that and get the research on it. We'll put it in the ebook. But that really is an overriding statement to the things we've talked about ask them and get involved and do the rest of it. And it's something that every one of us ought to have tattooed on the inside of our eyelid.
Gotcha. I totally agree. The next question, what could I do? This sounds like from a sales leader out there. What could I do to bring my coaches up to speed with your principles? Well, boy, we get asked that a lot. These are new. I mean, everyone is buying systems to gamify, but they're wondering, okay, how do I leverage, or rather they're buying the technology, but they don't have the system. And what Chuck brings to bear is 40 years of experience designing systems, and what we do is we put it into the technology. So what Chuck and I are trying to work on now is more of this content for everybody. So review the ebook that was put out before, review my Forbes article, go buy the Game of Work, download Chuck's scoring PDF. It's right here today in that sidebar. Wait for the ebook coming here. But more important than that, I've asked Chuck to put together, we're forming an ecosystem of partners here, because we'll never be as good at Chuck at gamification. So I've asked Chuck to put together some training, video facilitated training. Maybe you could talk about it for a minute, Chuck. Would you mind?
Well, we're trying to identify the best way to roll the principles out. It's such an individualized process, but we would like to capture the principles and somehow make them available across the country.
Awesome. So know everyone, we're working on it. We're trying, and this will come from Chuck's team. We're going to promote it. We're going to do the same thing in all of our areas where we want to bring in our partners that are far more specialized and better than we are. But we're pretty excited about it. The next question, where does gamification work best? Is it with the sales development reps or the closers? And I'll take a stab at that one, and then I want Chuck to get your thoughts. We've actually seen more impact with the sales development teams than we have with our closers, though we've seen it with both. And remember, it seems like the impact is with those leading indicators. And we're asking leading indicators out of both teams, but the ones that really live and breathe it is the sales development teams. Have you seen anything, any principles there on where gamification works best, Chuck?
Well, I think it works best with people. I don't mean to be a generalist here, but we've often said and believe this to be true, that if a task is important enough to ask somebody to do, it must be important enough to give feedback on. Just let that soak in for a minute. But if you're in an organization and you want somebody to answer the phone, do an outbound call, clean a wastebasket, if there's duty that you've decided is important enough to ask somebody to do, you need to be duty bound to make it important enough to give feedback on. Now, if you're going to give feedback on it, then implementing the elements of gamification, instant contemporaneous scoring, etc., has to work, but it works across the board. We've not really seen anybody that doesn't respond to it.
Oh, that's great. That's great. This one's probably more for you, Chuck. How do I get my people to choose to compete? I don't know if you had some strong thoughts on forced competition, didn't you?
Yeah, I think one of the keys, and here's something that most of us haven't spent a lot of time on. I know we're really close to time, but where you want to look for really giant leapfrog progress is not so much in the top 20% of your group, but in that middle 40%. Ken, you talked about it a little bit. If you look at it just on an asymptote, the middle 40% only accounts for 16% of your results. But the great news is that they can get gains of 200 and 300% if they're properly coached and properly engaged. But you have to get them engaged and not just blow them away with who the contest winner is. And so that's why I'm a big promotions guy. And moving in that regard, I think promotions are more sustainable than contests.
Awesome. Well, that's it, guys. We're at our hour mark, just beyond. Just a quick review. We will be offering these as slides. So we've had tons of requests for the slides already in the comments. This will be put together as a second ebook. We've got a lot more content than the first round. You can still download all those different things in the sidebar there, including Chuck's book on scorekeeping, including the first ebook that we did. So stay tuned. I've got some other fun webinars coming up. I will be having a webinar with Paul Allen of Gallup. And appreciate everybody tuning in. Chuck, thank you so much for traveling down here from Park City. That's a long way to go, but we love having you. It's always fun. Thanks again, Chuck.
Thanks for having us. Let's take care, and I'll do better.